The first step in completing an initial terminal road train air brake test is to determine which test method to use. If the controlling locomotive is equipped with a calibrated airflow indicator gauge, the airflow method should be used. To determine if the airflow indicator gauge has been calibrated, look for a red dot above the serial number of the indicator. The leakage test method is the alternative. Do not combine the two methods. Start and finish with the same test procedure. Let's review the airflow method of testing and inspection. The purpose of this program is to introduce you to a recently approved air brake test, the airflow method, and to explain the procedures for conducting the test. The airflow method is an improvement over the air leakage testing method because it provides a more accurate and more positive means of qualifying a train's air brake system. The two methods differ in several important ways. First, the leakage method measures the amount of air leaking from the brake pipe, while the airflow method measures the airflow required to replenish the escaping air. Second, the leakage test only measures air pressure loss in the brake pipe and branch pipe. The airflow method tests the entire brake system, including control valves and reservoirs. Third, the leakage method does not test the capability of the pressure maintaining feature on 26L or later type brake equipment. The airflow method tests the brake system as it is operated, with the pressure maintaining feature cut in. As you can see, the airflow method is a more thorough and therefore more reliable test. It evaluates the entire train, including the brake pipe and all system components with the automatic brake valve and pressure maintaining feature in the normal operating position. Because of this, the airflow method has been approved by the Federal Railroad Administration as an alternative method of qualifying air brake systems. The FRA has approved this method, however, only for operations where the lead locomotive is equipped with a calibrated airflow indicator and 26L or later type brake equipment, incorporating a pressure maintaining feature. On locomotives which lack this equipment, the conventional leakage test must be done. Where authorized, the airflow test must be performed whenever a leakage test would be required under present rules. This includes testing at the initial terminal, at intermediate terminals, and whenever cars are added to the train. The initial terminal air test will be performed as required by Union Pacific rules, AAR rules, and FRA power brake laws. Brake systems qualified using the airflow method must meet three standards prior to testing. First, brake pipe pressure on the locomotive must read 90 psi. Secondly, the end of train device head end monitor must read at least 75 pounds pressure before the test is started, and the rear car of the train must be charged to within 15 psi of the feed valve setting. And third, airflow must not exceed 60 cubic feet per minute. Also, when using the airflow method, the brake valve cutoff valve must remain in the in or freight position. Two types of airflow indicators are currently in use on Union Pacific locomotives. Though their dial faces are slightly different, the gauges function identically. The pointer indicates the volume of air flowing into the brake pipe system. Movement of the pointer to the right is normal during the charging of a train or following the release of a brake application. Airflow is at a high rate during these times due to the charging of the brake system. As the train becomes charged, airflow will tend to drop and the pointer will gradually move to the left. All trains charge at different rates. Now we'll turn our attention to the procedure involved in conducting a brake system test using the airflow method. Before performing the airflow test, make sure that you afford yourself proper blue signal protection according to Rule 5.13. When conducting an initial terminal air test, the airflow indicator must read 60 CFM or less, and the rear end of the train must be charged to within 15 psi of the feed or regulating valve setting. This reading can be observed at the EOT device on the train's rear coupler or on the head end device. The EOT device head end monitor must also read at least 75 psi. The head-end device must be tuned to the correct frequency as indicated by the EOT ID numbers.
Engineer on a UP 9388 East, come in, over.
Carmen, this is the engineer on the UP 9388 East, over.
This is the Carmen. You may set your brakes when you're ready, over.
After receiving notification to apply brakes for testing and observing the AFI reading is 60 CFM or less, the engineer performs a 20-pound brake pipe reduction.
Carmen, this is the engineer on the UP 9388 East. Brakes are applied for test, over.
The carman or brakeman will then inspect the train brakes to determine that angle cocks are properly positioned. Air brakes are applied on each car. Piston travel is correct. Brake rigging does not bind or foul, and all parts of brake equipment are properly secured.
Engineer on a UP 9388 East, come in, over.
Carmen, this is the engineer on the UP 9388 East, over.
This is the Carmen. Your application test is complete. You may release your brakes when ready, over.
When the inspection has been completed, the engineer will place the automatic brake valve in the release position. This will cause the airflow to increase beyond 60 CFM. This is normal.
Carmen, this is the engineer on the UP 9388 East. Brakes are released, over.
The carman or brakeman will then inspect each brake to make sure all brakes have been released. When the engineer is not present, the carman may conduct this test and place the certification slip on the lead locomotive control stand. As an alternative to walking this inspection during the initial terminal air test, the release inspection may be conducted as the train departs, provided release of the air brakes has been initiated on the rear car, the engineer has been notified in writing that the air brake test has been satisfactorily completed, the airflow indicator is at or below the 60 CFM mark, and the blue signal protection has been removed from the train and track. This roll-by inspection must be performed on each car in the train to ensure all brakes have released, nothing is dragging, and no unsafe conditions exist. While the train is en route, the airflow test must be repeated at intermediate terminals as required by Union Pacific and FRA rules. Intermediate terminals are designated along the route at points no further than 1,000 miles apart. While the train is en route, if the airflow indicator exceeds 60 CFM and does not return to 60 CFM or less within a reasonable length of time, the train must be stopped for inspection and repairs. Remember, 100% of all train brakes must be operative at the initial terminal and all intermediate inspection points. When setting out cars on level track, and it has been determined that cars will not move if air brakes bleed off, apply the train brakes with a 20-pound brake pipe reduction. The engineer must notify a crew member that air has stopped exhausting at the automatic brake valve. A crew member must close the angle cock on the portion of the train that will be moved with the locomotive. Make sure the angle cock on the portion of the train or cars left standing is left open to allow emergency brake application when uncoupling. Remember, bottling the air is prohibited. To ensure cars do not move when detaching the locomotive or separating a train on an ascending grade, place all retaining valves in the exhaust position. Then apply a sufficient number of handbrakes on the low end of the cut of cars left standing. In situations where switching is performed and a crew member will remain in the immediate vicinity, it is permissible to tie handbrakes on the high end of cars left standing. In all cases, the engineer must then release the automatic and independent brakes to allow train slack to close in against the cars that have handbrakes applied. This assures that enough handbrakes have been applied to hold the cars to be left standing. Close the angle cock on the portion of the train to be moved with the locomotive. Always leave the angle cock open on the cars to be left standing to allow an emergency brake application. When rules require an application and release test on a train, charge the brake system to the amount specified by the rule. If no pressure is specified, charge the system so that a 20-pound brake pipe reduction will apply the brakes on the rear car. To begin the test, the engineer must be notified to apply the brakes. He must make a 20-pound brake pipe reduction. It must then be determined that the brakes apply on the rear car either by observing a 5-pound reduction on the end of train device, or if no gauge or device is available, visually determine that the brakes apply on the rear car. When the engineer receives notification to release the brakes, he must place the automatic brake valve in the release position. Determine that the brakes on the rear car have released. When using an end-of-train device, make sure that the brake pipe pressure increases at least 5 pounds. If no gauge or device is available, visually determine that brakes release on the rear car. You are required to pick up a solid block of cars on a grade. Remember, a solid block of cars is one or more cars coupled together that have been charged and tested by the initial terminal road train air brake test and have not been disconnected from an air supply for more than 2 hours. After adding a solid block of cars to your train while on a grade, the air brake system must be charged to within 15 pounds of the locomotive regulating valve setting. An application and release test must then be made to determine that brakes apply on the rear car. If the train brakes are released and the locomotive brakes cannot hold your train, apply a sufficient number of hand brakes. When a transfer train or yard train has not been tested by the initial terminal air brake test and is not going to exceed 20 miles, the train must receive an application and release test. Make sure that all brakes apply. For transfer train and yard train movements exceeding 20 miles, an initial terminal road train air brake test must be performed before the train departs. After changing the operative ends on a locomotive consist, is there a test required? Yes, you must perform a locomotive consist air brake test anytime you change operating ends. This will ensure that the brakes are operating properly. Engineers using dynamic brakes must make sure that the locomotive consist does not exceed a total of 28 axles. If a locomotive consist exceeds this requirement, the engineer must cut out the dynamic brake functions by turning off the dynamic brake cutout switch located on the engine control panel on enough trailing units to comply with this requirement. A penalty brake application will occur if the locomotive brakes are released and the train speed exceeds the overspeed settings, or if a more restrictive cab signal is not acknowledged within 6 seconds of its reception. When the controlling unit in a locomotive consist dies and you attempt to restart it while moving, a penalty brake application may occur. Before restarting the unit, stop the train and fully apply the independent brake. If a penalty brake application does occur, the engineer must actuate the independent brake. The automatic brake valve handle must be placed in the suppression position and left in this position until the train is stopped. After the train is stopped, you may reset the PCS and release the brakes. To reset the PCS, place the throttle in idle, or if using dynamic brake, place the dynamic brake lever in off. If the penalty was caused by the cab signal, make sure the signal change is acknowledged. When the PCS resets, place the automatic brake valve in the release position.